You stand in Hong Kong. The year is 1894. The heat hangs thick, and the air is swollen with a smell so dense it clings to your throat. It is the odor of damp timber, salted fish, and beneath it all, something sharper, the sour stench of bodies left too long in closed rooms. Outside the narrow lanes of Taipingshan, men carry bamboo stretchers, not with food, not with cloth, but with corpses swaddled in mats. Flies scatter when the bundles are laid at the door of makeshift mortuaries. Some of those carried still bleed from the mouth. You see rats, dozens, hundreds, their slick bodies sliding along refuse heaps, their bellies swollen. At first, they collapse quietly in corners. Then the humans follow. What you are watching is not rumor or metaphor. It is the first strike of the third plague pandemic. A disaster that would burn from this port to the furthest reaches of the earth. By the time the summer sun sets over Victoria Peak, physicians in starched coats argue among themselves, caught between pride and fear. On one side stands Alexander Yersin, a young French-Swiss bacteriologist, who bends over the blackened lymph nodes of the dead and pulls from them the culprit, a tiny rod-shaped bacillus. His microscope reveals a new killer, Yersinia pestis. On the other side, Katasato Shibasaburo, a Japanese bacteriologist, disputes the claim, and the colonial government hesitates. But outside the laboratory, hesitation is death. Hong Kong's narrow tenements swallow the plague whole, and the rats carry it further still. Within weeks, nearly every household in Taipingshan is struck. Death does not arrive politely. It blooms in the groin, the armpit, the neck, buboes swollen until they burst, skin mottles to black. Fever shakes the body into delirium. Then silence. The colony authorities torch whole blocks of the city, not as punishment, but as defense. Flames curl upward, sending ash of wood and bone alike into the heavy night. The third pandemic has begun. From Hong Kong, its path will spread across steamships, across oceans, hidden in the guts of fleas clinging to rats. Within a decade, the same plague will claim lives in Bombay, in Sydney, in Honolulu, and in San Francisco, where quarantine lines will slice through Chinatown, sealing families inside their homes. Alive or dead, the past is not dead. It is only waiting. If what you are about to witness unsettles you, or awakens something long buried, consider subscribing. Not for numbers, but for remembrance. If these forgotten stories matter, let them rise again. If they leave you silent, let that silence remain. And so you follow the trail backward, to where it first burned bright. Hong Kong, 1894. A British colony crowded with traders, dock workers, and families pressed into hillside tenements. Here, the collision of empire and epidemic becomes visible in every alley. Ships from Canton unload goods and vermin together. Rats run freely between warehouses and kitchens, between homes and sewers. The people of Taipingshan live shoulder to shoulder, whole families in single darkened rooms, with little water and less space. Disease does not need invitation here, it has already found a welcome. The British rulers establish quarantine camps and sanitary boards. They enforce sudden inspections. Chinese households are stripped, belongings burned, entire districts cleared in the name of hygiene. To the colonized population, it feels less like medicine and more like punishment. Fear spreads not only of plague, but of the white-coated men who carry stretchers and kerosene cans. Yet the records are precise. By the end of 1894, thousands have died in Hong Kong alone. Ships, once symbols of trade and progress, become plague arcs. Rats die in their holds. Their fleas leap to human skin. And the infection travels on steam and saltwater faster than any empire can control. This is how you will trace the story, from the sweltering lanes of Taipingshan, to the burning ghats of Bombay, to the barred doors of San Francisco's Chinatown. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you are about to remember may never leave you again. Hong Kong, 1894, the first fires. You walk again through Taiping-shan, the district where the plague first declared itself. The summer sun has not yet risen fully, yet the alleys already hum with unease. What was once a bustling quarter of hawkers and traders now sounds different, shutters closed. Footsteps hurried, voices hushed. The smell that guides you is unmistakable, an acrid cocktail of spoiled rice, dried fish, sewage, and the sour tang of bodies decomposing behind thin wooden walls. The British colonial government called Taiping-shan unsanitary long before the plague arrived. Reports from sanitary inspectors described its labyrinth of wooden houses, stacked one against another, families pressed into damp, windowless rooms. In such conditions, ordinary illnesses already thrived, but now, death itself has found the perfect architecture. You see a woman dragging a body on a mat to the street. She does not call for help. No neighbor reaches out. Fear silences compassion. The corpse, once her son, is left outside a shuttered temple. Soon another joins it, and another. By mid-morning, an entire row of mats lines the cobblestones. British authorities order the corpses collected quickly, fearful that the sight of so many might unnerve the colony further. Yet no amount of removal can cleanse the streets of the buzzing flies and the whispers of contagion. Inside a cramped room, Alexander Yersin bends over a dissecting table. The French-Swiss bacteriologist works in conditions as crude as the alleys outside, no pristine laboratory. Only a borrowed temple hall. He has been summoned under urgency after Katasato Shibasaburo, the Japanese bacteriologist already working here, failed to provide a definitive explanation. By lantern light, Yersin pierces the darkened swellings of the dead. He stains the tissue, places it under his microscope, and sees them, tiny rods, clumped like grains of rice. He calls them la bacille de la peste. History will later rename it Yersinia pestis in his honor. But discovery does not mean control. In fact, for the people outside, nothing changes. They do not speak of bacilli, they speak only of fever and death. The British officials focus on the rats. Dead ones are suddenly everywhere, in drains, in kitchens, in the corners of warehouses. Their stiff bodies warn of what will follow in humans. Yet the connection is not fully understood, and by the time officials debate, the fleas have already leapt to new hosts. The colonial government, desperate to display authority, begins to act. Houses are marked with red paint. Tenants are forced into the streets as inspectors march inside, dousing belongings with kerosene, bedding, clothing, wooden furniture, all burned in sudden bonfires that rise above the rooftops. To European authorities, this is sanitation. To Chinese residents, it feels like an assault, an invasion of the last private corner they possess. Families weep as ancestral tablets, silk heirlooms, and wedding garments vanish in smoke. You see the fires not only in hearts but in entire neighborhoods. In July 1894, when cases climb beyond measure, British officials order the wholesale demolition of parts of Taiping-shan. Whole blocks are reduced to ash, a cleansing by flame. The crackle of collapsing beams mixes with the muffled cries of those who know they have lost not just homes, but memory itself. Later, official records will claim this destruction was necessary for health. But in the moment, you feel it as a second devastation layered atop the plague. Beyond Hong Kong, news travels quickly. Reports of the mysterious pestilence reach Bombay, Canton, and London. Rumors exaggerate, but the core is true. Plague has returned. Europe and Asia had lived centuries fearing this word. The Black Death of the 14th century was not forgotten, and whispers now revive it. Perhaps the same terror has returned. Carried by rats in the age of steamships. By the end of 1894, over 2.500 deaths are recorded in Hong Kong. The true number, hidden by families who bury their own in secret, is higher. Ships leaving the harbor are fumigated, but rats are never fully controlled. From the holds of these vessels, fleas carrying Yersinia pestis will travel to ports across the globe. The human response fractures. Some flee Hong Kong entirely, abandoning businesses and families. Others turn to ritual. Incense burned at doorways. Paper charms pasted on walls. Taoist priests walk the lanes, chanting sutras to calm the restless spirits of those abandoned. British authorities, unfamiliar with such rites, dismiss them as superstition. Yet in the darkness of plague, prayer offers the only comfort left to many. One morning, you stand by a mass pit at Kennedy Town, a coastal area west of the city. Here the dead are buried quickly, lime shoveled over bodies without markers. Coffins are too costly, time too short. A single grave holds dozens. The workers wear cloths tied over their faces, not for scientific protection but for the unbearable smell. Overhead, crows circle and descend. Some of the bodies still twitch faintly, the final spasms of those not entirely dead when delivered. It is said in later accounts that a few were buried alive, mistaken for corpses in the haste of removal. Hong Kong becomes a lesson written in fire, fear, and flesh. The plague has shown how easily it can carve through human defenses, how quickly ships can spread its reach, how helpless empire appears before the smallest of organisms. Yet this is only the first chapter, for in the years that follow, Bombay will burn with even greater loss. And later still, the rats in the bellies of San Francisco ships will wake America to the same terror. For now, as the year closes, you stand in a city both wounded and transformed. Whole districts have vanished, reduced to charred skeletons of wood. Families have scattered or died. The British Crown maintains its authority. But beneath the Union Jack flies another invisible banner, one carried by rats, by fleas, by bacilli too small to see. The third pandemic has taken its first step, and you have watched it. Bombay. The burning Ghats. You arrive in Bombay, 1896. The monsoon rains have washed the streets, but the air remains heavy, dense with moisture that clings to the skin. Ships crowd the harbor, steam funnels blackening the sky, cargo unloaded onto the wharves. Among the bales of cotton and sacks of grain, you notice movements, rats, countless rats, darting from ship to shore, from warehouse to alley. They arrive with the same hidden passengers that left Hong Kong, fleas swollen with plague bacilli. The city is immense, a colonial jewel of the British Raj. More than 800,000 souls live here, crowded into chawls, multi-storied buildings where whole families share a single darkened room. The mills of Bombay roar with industry, pulling peasants from villages into cramped quarters where air barely moves and drains overflow. It is in this teeming, breathing mass of humanity that plague finds fertile ground. The first cases are dismissed. A fever, perhaps cholera, perhaps dysentery, diseases already known to the city. But soon the telltale swellings appear. Buboes in the groin, the armpit, the neck. Men collapse on the mill floor, their skin mottling to blue-black before the day's work is finished. By October 1896, the truth is undeniable. Plague has arrived in Bombay. The British authorities react swiftly, but not with tenderness. A plague committee is established under Surgeon General William Gatacre and later directed by W.C. Rand. A military officer. Soldiers march through the city, enforcing inspections at gunpoint. Women are forced from their rooms, saris torn aside for examination. Men are stripped, prodded, and marked as suspects. Belongings are seized and burned. Entire chawls are fumigated with sulfur dioxide, choking residents as they huddle outside. You witness families herded into segregation camps, plague sufferers on one side, the healthy on another. Camps sprawl with tents, overcrowded and unsanitary, fear clinging thicker than the monsoon damp. In these conditions, death spreads faster still. Official records count the bodies in tens of thousands. But behind those numbers are funerals that never end. At the Ghats along the Mithi River, the fires do not cease. Pyres rise day and night, smoke trailing into the sky in columns so constant they become part of the horizon. The smell of burning sandalwood is overwhelmed by the heavier stench of burning flesh. Ash settles on the water, mixing with flower garlands meant as offerings. The priests chant until their voices crack. You see children placing coins on the foreheads of their dead parents before the flames consume them. Resistance soon grows. To the Indian population, plague measures feel like humiliation more than healing. British soldiers touch women without consent, storm temples in the name of disinfection, and burn sacred objects with no regard for faith. Rumors spread that the plague hospitals are death traps, places where patients are taken never to return. Fear of the disease merges with fear of colonial power. In 1897, resentment erupts violently. In Pune, two young men, Damodar and Balkrishna Chapakar, assassinate W.C. Rand, the officer most hated for his brutal enforcement. His death shocks the colonial establishment, but to many Indians it becomes a grim justice, a response to indignities piled upon plague and poverty alike. Meanwhile, the numbers climb. By the turn of the century, Bombay has recorded hundreds of thousands of deaths. In some years, entire neighborhoods seem emptied overnight. Families who can flee do so, pouring back into rural districts. But they do not leave the plague behind, they carry it outward, sowing infection across villages. By 1902, the plague burns across India, killing more than 1 million each year. You hear the wails in the countryside. Peasants collapse in their fields, their families left without food or strength to bury them. Cart after cart of corpses rolls toward the burning Ghats, the wheels groaning under their weight. Travelers describe seeing jackals tugging at half-buried bodies, crows circling above as if the land itself has turned into one vast charnel ground. Medical science, however, does not stand still. Waldemar Haffkine, a Jewish bacteriologist working in Bombay, develops a vaccine in 1897. In trials, thousands of Indian volunteers line up to receive injections. Some are soldiers, others prisoners, many desperate commoners hoping for a defense. Haffkine's vaccine reduces mortality among those inoculated. But mistrust lingers. Rumors claim the injections themselves spread plague. And in some districts, villagers drive vaccinators away with stones. Still, the measures grow more organized. Quarantine lines are established, vaccination campaigns extended, but the plague is relentless. In Bombay alone, the population shrinks by more than a quarter. Entire trades collapse as millworkers die or flee. The docks empty as ships avoid the infected port. The city, once the symbol of colonial prosperity, becomes instead a monument to disease and death. The human toll carves itself not only into numbers, but into rituals. In homes, women light small lamps for the souls of those taken too quickly for proper rites. In temples, priests chant protective mantras against invisible demons. And at the Ghats, the fires never die. Night after night, you watch as families circle their dead, laying garlands of marigolds and sprinkling ghee onto pyres that already roar with heat. Children clutch each other, faces streaked with ash, as the sky rains embers. British records describe Bombay as a battlefield, a place where plague was fought with medicine, quarantine, and fire. But from within, it feels less like battle and more like surrender. Each new morning brings the same: stretchers, wailing, smoke, and behind it all, the rats continue to scurry, unseen yet undefeated, carrying the bacillus in their fleas from dockside warehouses to village grain stores. From ship to shore, by the early 1900s, India has lost millions. Official figures record at least 12 million deaths by 1910, though the real number is higher. The plague becomes not a passing storm but a season of death, recurring year after year, until it is woven into the fabric of life itself. You stand at the ghats as another pyre crackles, the flames bending in the humid air. A priest chants, his voice hoarse, as sparks leap skyward. Around you, the people do not look shocked anymore. Grief has become daily, expected, ordinary. The city of Bombay, jewel of empire, now glows at night not with lamps or celebrations, but with endless fire. The third pandemic, once a local horror in Hong Kong, has found in India its widest killing ground. And yet, the rats do not stop here. They climb once more onto ships. Across the Arabian Sea, across the Pacific, they carry the plague in their bellies. Soon, Honolulu will burn. Soon, San Francisco will be sealed. And you will watch it spread still further. Honolulu and San Francisco. Quarantined by fear. You arrive in Honolulu, December 1899. The city lies between mountain and sea, its harbor filled with masts and funnels, a gateway of trade between Asia and the Americas. Yet the streets feel tense, hushed. Whispers travel faster than carts. Plague has come to the islands. The first cases appear in Chinatown. A dockworker collapses, fevered and groaning, a bubo swelling in his groin. Soon others fall, their skin blotched, their breath shallow. Fear spreads even more quickly than the sickness itself. The Board of Health responds with drastic measures. They close streets, seal off entire blocks, and post armed guards at intersections. But fear of infection is not matched by understanding. On January 20th, 1900, the decision is made to burn. Fire is declared the only way to cleanse the district. At first, the burning is controlled, houses marked as contaminated or torched, their flames watched by soldiers and firemen. But the trade winds shift. Sparks leap from roof to roof, and the fire turns wild. You watch as a wall of flame devours Chinatown, a whole quarter of the city reduced to ash in a single night. Families stand on the edges, clutching bundles of what little they have saved, their faces lit red by the blaze. Those trapped inside the cordon are left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. When the fire finally dies, 38 acres of homes are gone. Thousands are homeless, driven into hastily built camps on the outskirts. Officially, the burning was meant to save the city from plague. In truth, it left scars deeper than infection, as Chinese and Japanese residents remembered not only the sickness but the fire that erased their community. From Honolulu, the rats and fleas keep traveling eastward. Steamships carry them across the Pacific, their bellies filled with cargo and contagion. By March 1900, plague reaches San Francisco. The first victim is Wong Chut King, a Chinese immigrant found dead in a boarding house on DuPont Street. Doctors open his body and find swollen lymph nodes, unmistakable signs of plague. But instead of swift acknowledgement, denial sets in. The merchants and leaders of the city fear what the word plague will mean for trade. Governor Henry Gage insists there is no plague, that rumors are inventions meant to harm California's reputation. Yet bodies continue to appear, silent testimony against official lies. The U.S. Marine Hospital Service, led by Joseph Kinyoon, confirms the presence of Yersinia pestis. But his warnings clash with politics. Businessmen pressure newspapers to downplay the crisis, fearing quarantines will cripple the port. Chinese residents, meanwhile, are singled out as scapegoats. San Francisco's Chinatown is cordoned off, patrolled by police who bar Chinese people from leaving, while white residents of the same district walk out freely. Behind the barricades, thousands of men, women, and children are trapped, forced to endure searches, fumigations, and humiliating inspections. You walk through the narrow alleys of Chinatown and feel the weight of fear. Families hide the sick, Afraid that reporting illness will mean forcible removal. Doctors knock at doors, but few open. Rumors swirl that plague victims will be carted away and never seen again. In the meantime, the rats roam freely, slipping between walls and across sewers, carrying their fleas from basement to basement. By the summer of 1900, the conflict has escalated into a battle between medicine and politics. Qinyun is vilified, accused of fabricating plague for personal gain. Governor Gage brands him a liar. But the evidence cannot be denied forever. In 1901, the federal government steps in, authorizing new measures of control. Chinatown is fumigated with burning sulfur, its walls whitewashed with lime. Residents are lined up for inoculation with experimental plague serum. Fear of the treatment proves nearly as strong as fear of the disease. Through all of this, the plague toll remains relatively small in San Francisco, fewer than 200 deaths in the first outbreak. But the shadow of fear is immense. Commerce slows, neighborhoods fracture, and resentment festers. In 1907, the plague returns, this time not confined to Chinatown. Rats infected with plague fleas spread across the wider city, and the danger becomes undeniable. Officials respond with mass rat-catching campaigns. Tens of thousands of rodents are trapped, poisoned, or burned. Posters go up offering rewards for dead rats. And children roam the streets with clubs, hunting them for coins. Each carcass is examined by bacteriologists searching for the telltale bacillus. The campaign finally shows results. By 1908, the plague is declared under control in San Francisco. But the city has been marked. Chinatown carries the memory of quarantine lines and armed guards. The wider city remembers the sight of rats burned in heaps, their fur crackling, their bodies tossed into pits of quicklime. For the rest of the United States, San Francisco becomes a lesson in both fear and denial. Other ports, from New Orleans to Galveston, increase inspections. Medical journals warn of plague in the belly of every ship. And yet, even as the U.S. tightens defenses, the bacillus continues to spread quietly, burrowing not just through cities, but through nature itself. By the 1910s, plague has left its human epidemic form behind and established a new home in wild rodent populations of the American West. Prairie dogs, ground squirrels, and other burrowing animals become permanent reservoirs of Yersinia pestis. The disease that once moved with rats from Asia to America now settles into the very soil of the continent. Even in the present day, plague cases still emerge in these regions, faint echoes of the third pandemic's first arrival. You walk the streets of San Francisco one last time. The wooden houses of Chinatown have been rebuilt, but memory lingers. On balconies, laundry sways in the fog. In basements, the scurry of rats has not disappeared. And in the city's archives, among yellowing records, the story remains. A disease carried across the ocean, denied by leaders, fought in fire and quarantine, and ridden most deeply in the fear of those trapped behind barricades. From Hong Kong to Bombay, from Honolulu to San Francisco, the third pandemic has proved what history already knew. Plague respects no border, no empire, no denial. It follows the simplest paths: rats, fleas, human breath, and wherever it goes, you remain, watching as cities burn, as leaders hesitate, as the dead are carried in silence. But the story is not yet finished. For after San Francisco, the plague still spreads inland, carried on rails and rivers, finding its way into the heart of continents. And still, the world learns that fire, quarantine, and denial are no match for the hunger of a microbe. The lasting legacy. Plague becomes permanent. You move forward into the early decades of the 20th century. The plague no longer rages only in sudden infernos of death, like Hong Kong in 1894, Bombay in 1896, or San Francisco in 1900. Instead, it takes root more quietly, burrowing into the soil, the animals, the very landscape itself. This is the final, unsettling truth of the third pandemic. It did not end. It simply became part of the world. After the waves that scorched through cities, the plague spread outward into rural ground, carried by animals that no quarantine line could stop. In India, where more than 12 million people died by the 1920s, rats became a permanent reservoir. Villages learned to live with the rhythm of plague seasons, as familiar as the monsoon. In some years, entire districts emptied, families abandoning houses to let the disease run its course. The British Raj attempted massive rat eradication campaigns, setting traps by the thousands, digging pits filled with quicklime to destroy carcasses. Yet still, the fleas leapt, the bacillus survived, and outbreaks returned. In China, the disease shifted form. By 1910, plague erupted in Manchuria, not the bubonic form marked by swollen lymph nodes, but the more terrifying pneumonic plague, spread through the air itself. Travelers described entire villages wiped out within days, corpses frozen in the winter snow, their mouths stained with blood. This outbreak killed more than 60,000 in just a few months. Doctors wore strange, beak-like cloth masks stuffed with cotton, an early ancestor of the respirator. In the silence of those frozen towns, you could feel the terror of a sickness that no longer required rats or fleas. Only breath. The third pandemic was different from the Black Death. It arrived in an age of microscopes, bacteriology, and telegrams. The bacillus had a name, and vaccines existed, yet modernity did not mean mastery. Plague moved faster than science, and denial often outran truth. In city after city, authorities downplayed the danger, fearful of panic and economic ruin. And in each place, it was the poor, the marginalized, the immigrant communities who suffered most. Chinese workers in San Francisco, mill laborers in Bombay, dock hands in Hong Kong. You stand in San Francisco again. But years later, in 1924, the city still carries scars. That year, plague flared not in Chinatown but in the Mexican-American community of Los Angeles. 30 people died, and fear surged again. Quarantine lines went up, neighborhoods were sealed. The newspapers once more debated whether the danger was real or exaggerated. And once more, the plague reminded the modern world that it had not vanished. Meanwhile, the disease took quieter, longer-lasting refuge in the American West. By the 1920s, scientists confirmed that plague had established itself in wild rodent populations, prairie dogs, ground squirrels, woodrats. Unlike humans, these animals did not always die in visible heaps. Instead, they carried the bacillus silently across the plains. From then on, the United States would never be free of plague. Even today, scattered cases appear in Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, reminders that the third pandemic never truly ended. The legacy was global. In Africa, plague spread to ports along the east coast, carried by Indian Ocean shipping. Madagascar became one of its strongholds, and remains so into the present. In South America, Brazil reported outbreaks in its coastal cities. On nearly every continent, plague carved reservoirs that would outlast the initial terror. But the third pandemic also changed medicine itself. Yerson's discovery of the bacillus, Haffkine's vaccine, and the development of public health systems all grew from this catastrophe. In India, the plague sparked one of the first large-scale campaigns of modern epidemiology. In China, the Manchurian outbreak led to international cooperation in medical conferences. In the United States, the crisis forced federal and state governments to establish permanent public health boards. Still, the human memory of plague is not only scientific. It is carved in smoke and ash. In Hong Kong, whole districts of Taipingshan were erased by fire, rebuilt only later as clean neighborhoods under colonial order. In Bombay, The burning ghats of the 1890s remain etched in accounts of priests who watched flames rise higher than temples. In Honolulu, Chinatown was wiped from the map, leaving generations to remember not just disease but the fire that consumed their homes. And in San Francisco, Chinese families told stories of being barricaded, fumigated, and inspected at gunpoint, less a story of medicine than of humiliation. You look across the decades and see a pattern. Plague reveals not just the fragility of bodies, but the fault lines of societies. It exposes the divisions between ruler and ruled, rich and poor, immigrant and citizen. It asks who is worth saving, and who may be left to burn. The third pandemic, for all its microbes and fleas, was also a pandemic of politics. By the 1950s, the numbers had slowed. Antibiotics, newly discovered, turned plague from a near-certain death sentence into a treatable infection, if recognized in time. Quarantine camps closed. The great bonfires of belongings ceased. And in the cities of empire, plague receded from daily fear. Yet in the soil of India, in the burrows of the American prairie, in the highlands of Madagascar, it never disappeared. You stand at one such place, a field in Arizona where prairie dogs pop their heads from mounds of earth. To the unknowing eye, it is peaceful, almost charming, but scientists have tested these animals and found Yersinia pestis still present. The same bacillus that tore through Hong Kong in 1894 now rests in this quiet land. Waiting. The third pandemic did not end with a treaty or a victory. It faded into the background, leaving behind both science and scars. And even as the world moved on to other terrors, world wars, influenza, new diseases, the plague remained. A whisper in the soil, a possibility in the bite of a flea. As you turn away, you remember the fires of Hong Kong, the smoke of Bombay, the burning of Honolulu, the barricades of San Francisco. These are not disconnected events, but chapters of a single story, a story of rats' bellies carrying death across oceans, of fear answered with fire, of microbes outlasting empires. The third pandemic has no neat ending. It remains, quiet but unforgotten, carved into the bones of history and the soil beneath your feet. You stand at the edge of time, looking back over the trail of fire and ash, from Hong Kong's torched alleys to Bombay's endless burning ghats, from Honolulu's vanished Chinatown to San Francisco's barricaded streets. The story is the same. Plague arrived, and the world responded with fear, denial, and fire. You have witnessed more than numbers. You have walked through narrow tenements where families dragged their dead into the street. You have stood at riverside ghats where smoke curled unbroken for months. You have seen whole neighborhoods turn to cinder under the excuse of protection. And you have heard the silence of those sealed behind quarantine lines, waiting for either fever or starvation. The third pandemic did not kill as suddenly as the Black Death. It did not wipe away half of Europe in a few years. Instead, it lingered for a century, claiming its victims steadily, carving scars into the places it touched. More than 15 million lives are estimated to have been lost, most in India, but also in China, the Americas, Africa. The disease did not vanish, it learned to hide. In the soil, in the burrows of wild rodents, in the edges of human memory. It remained. Even now, plague exists. Each year, scattered cases appear in the deserts of the American West, in the highlands of Madagascar, in rural villages of Central Asia. Modern antibiotics can cure it, yet the bacillus still waits. As patient as ever, the world believes itself safe. But history whispers otherwise. What remains most haunting is not the bacteria itself, but the human response. Time and again, denial outweighed truth. Leaders feared loss of trade more than loss of life. Immigrant communities bore the brunt of quarantines and humiliations, while wealthier districts evaded the strictest rules. Plague was not only a test of medicine, it was a mirror. revealing how societies value some lives more than others. And yet, there were sparks of progress. Yerson's microscope revealed the invisible killer. Hafkin's vaccine gave hope in India. International cooperation slowly grew, shaping the field of public health. In its devastation, the plague forced the world to see the importance of sanitation, surveillance, and science. Still, as you leave this history, what lingers is not only science but smoke. The memory of flames consuming Taiping Shan's houses. The glow of Bombay's pyres reflected in the river. The ash that settled on Honolulu's streets after Chinatown burned. The barricades in San Francisco where men with rifles kept families from crossing a line. These images remain, heavy and dark, because they reveal not just the plague's cruelty, but ours. At the end, you kneel by a marker in Hong Kong's cemetery. The stone is weathered, the name almost gone. Moss creeps into the letters. Rain has washed the edges smooth. This, too, is part of the plague's legacy, millions left unnamed. Their memory carried only in numbers. But for a moment, you are here, remembering not numbers, but lives. The third pandemic has passed into history. Yet its shadow remains. The rats are quieter now. The ships cleaner. The streets brighter. But beneath the soil, in the silence of burrows, in the archives of memory, it waits. The world learned much, but it also forgot much. And forgetting is always dangerous. The past is not dead. It is only waiting.